Countries like Jamaica found that when they became free, they soon were in every kind of financial problem because they didn't have the economic strength to, shall we say, make it on their own. They needed time to build economies that could then make it in the world. When you see what all the food from abroad costs, you realize that the food production to feed ourselves in Jamaica is not only a matter of opportunity for you, it's a matter of survival for the nation. Comes 1973, there is a world convulsion caused by the oil price increases. All of a sudden, we are having to find sums of money we had never dreamed of before just to make ends meet. Now, what can you do? First of all, you go to the private banking system and you see, well, can I get a private banking loan? Because I'm strapped for cash, I need some support, and I'm having trouble paying my overseas bills.
When the private banks won't lend to you, then you've got to do something if you're leader of a country. And typically what you've got to do is to cut back your spending in some way and try and get more money so that the impact of those cutbacks are not as severe as they otherwise would be. And it's at that point that you generally come to the IMF.
We are not for sale, and tell them anytime they are willing to deal with an honorable Jamaica based on principles, sovereignty, pride and dignity, then we will talk the investment of the money. Bear in mind, this is a country literally beginning to unravel because it cannot finance what it needs. Because you can't have no penicillin in the hospital, you can't have no wheat to make bread.
And we would say, yep, that's true. We understand the crisis you're in, and we need to fix the underlying reasons for that crisis. And so here is what we think needs doing.
What you really need is to sit down with them and say, look, can I work out a 5-year program? And in the meantime, I'm strapped for some cash, so can you help me up front get out of the cash bind and then put it in the context of a long-term development plan? And they say, no, long-term development is your problem. We are here only to see who do you owe the money to, why are you in a bind, and we'll lend you some money in a very short time frame at full interest rate to get you out of the bind. And they then impose upon you tremendous restrictions in what you can spend.
And then we reach agreement on a set of measures on the budget, on the exchange rate, on monetary policy, on interest rates, on banks, on maybe privatization, and say, yep, we think this could solve your problem.
And you say to them, but if I do it that way, when I finish repaying you, I'm going to be in the bind all over, because this can't solve my problem. This is not our problem.
The whole idea was to set conditions which the government could not meet. And when the government failed to meet them, you would have to renegotiate a new loan in which the conditions became tighter. So the IMF didn't say, cut out this education program or cut out this health program. What the IMF said is, you must spend only so much money on health and education. And the implication of that was that you had to cut out some programs.
Essentially what the IMF wanted us to do was to devalue our currency. That's the first thing, to make our dollar cheaper.
They needed to expand their exports and diminish their imports. And the best way of doing that is to make foreign currency more expensive.
And since our society is so heavily dependent on imported food, imported fuel, imported books to go to school, imported medicine, when we devalue, the cost of those things we import go up to the citizens. And as a result, the economy today is much more under the control of foreigners, not necessarily through direct ownership, but through the mechanism of debt. In the 1970s, we owed $800 million. By the end of the 1980s, we owed $4 billion. Nowadays, we owe $7 billion. So the debt is rising, and all the time the debt is rising, our capacity to export, to produce, is getting less.
Well,
When you say the onion produced in this year, you can look at every house or every yard that you see around here. Everybody, all young, middle age, involved in picking out onion, sowing onion, reaping onion, bagging up onion. So everybody was involved in the production in this district. But right now, it is just a trickle, just the brave one them.
When it's ready for harvesting, you see imported potato right out in front of your home being sold. Potato that's grown in Idaho or New Brunswick or some other parts.
Hello? The shipment come every week, you know. Them can Irish, the US, the America, the one in Canada. And the red peas, we sell America.
When I was a little boy, I grew. Everybody that you see around here, their livelihood was planting peanuts. All those days are over. Over and gone.
All this land is what we used to farm carrots. Now we cannot farm anymore. We don't got any market for it. Because through the foreign carrots.
It's an insult to our dignity of not being able to produce and sell in your own market at home.
This is a free market, and I've learned that because of the financial problem that the government is under with the World Bank and the IMF. They are the one who institute the pressure on the government as far as we learn. Now we had a thing named protective market. The government said no import. And then now we compete with one another. But for the time being, you're open to the world to compete with the world.
Before we was unable to bring in anything because of the policy of the country. But lately it changed.
The difference with the person who comes in from foreign with his trailer is that he has now been given legal right to bring it in. So I'm not fighting him. I'm fighting the policy maker, the person who is foolish enough to sign such a policy.
Some of the prescriptions an IMF program usually seeks to implement is to get countries to eliminate artificial barriers to trade. They would require a country with an IMF program not to impose artificial restrictions on imports and not to unduly subsidize exports.
So when the person brings on his trailer, whether he's in Kingston or up here, whether a farmer gets smart and get on the trailer line, he will fill his pocket of money. But what will happen to the other thousands of farmers? So you're fattening a few people at the expense of a whole culture that took years to build up. You destroy it with a stroke of the pen.
Anything that led to the more self-reliance on our resources was strongly discouraged because of this emerging ideology which we now call globalization.
We have this dairy farm has been going from in the early 40s. And my father farmed here before me. It was on a continual rise in production.
The industry flourished from 18 million litres a year to over 30. I think we peaked at around 34 million litres in 91.
In 1992, the government entered into an agreement with the Inter-American Development Bank for a loan of about $50 million, which was to support agriculture and manufacturing. The conditionalities of those were that we should abandon any form of local subsidies, and we should abandon any control of the imports of milk powder, meats, and what have you.
Almost always when the IMF is lending to a country, a developing country, we'll be making loans, the World Bank will be making loans, and if it's in the Americas, the Inter-American Development Bank, which is a regional counterpart of the World Bank, will be making loans.
So, you couldn't get World Bank unless the IMF gave you the bill of health, and you couldn't get IMF unless the World Bank gave you a bill of health, and you couldn't get either unless the Inter-American Development Bank gave you a clean bill of health. Cross-conditionality. That is when they finally had you by two nooses by the neck.
In conjunction with the loan agreement, and at the same time, the World Trade Organization signed off all the member countries into this new world order of trade. This new world order means that there will be no government regulation in the trading of any commodities.
They're telling you that, well, look, if we lend you $50 million, in return you have to lower all your trade barriers and you have to compete with us on a level playing field. Well, that is all double talk.
It was at this time that the competition from reconstituted milk started to get severe.
We ended up with having an influx of powder which destroyed the dairy industry. Powder became normal form of milk consumption and the dairy industry was unable to sell their fresh milk.
Frank Quarry says he's been supplying fresh milk to Century Farm Products for 15 years. After last Sunday's collection, he says he was told that the company had too much milk and would not collect any more for an indefinite period. So on Friday, with nowhere to take 5 days worth of milk, he had to get rid of it.